What makes a man ride into the heart of nowhere? What kind of ghost chases a soul across 1,000 miles of dust and silence? These are questions worth asking. Because when Elijah Cole rode into the town of Clearwater, Wyoming Territory, in the autumn of 1878, nobody knew the answers. And nobody dared to ask. The horse was tired. So was the man. Both of them carried the weight of too many miles, too many memories. The gray gelding moved slow, head low, hooves dragging through the dirt of Main Street like a creature that had forgotten what rest felt like. And the rider sat hunched in the saddle, his shoulders curved against an invisible burden, his hat pulled low over eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty. Clearwater was not much of a town, a general store with a crooked porch and windows so dusty you could not see what lay inside, a saloon with no name, just a faded sign that might once have shown a picture of something, a church with a broken steeple that pointed accusingly at the gray sky. A handful of houses scattered like afterthoughts across the landscape, their paint peeling, their gardens gone to seed. The kind of place where people came to disappear, or to die. Elijah Cole had come for both. He was 43 years old, though he looked older. The war had done that to him. The years after had done worse. His face was weathered like old leather left too long in the sun, lined with scars both visible and hidden. Deep grooves ran from the corners of his eyes, carved there by years of squinting down rifle sights. His jaw was strong but hollow, the cheeks above it sunken with hunger and exhaustion. His eyes were the color of winter sky, pale and cold, and they held the kind of emptiness that made people look away. Not because they were cruel, but because they were haunted. He wore a long brown coat, dusty and torn at the hem, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, a gray shirt beneath, buttoned to the throat despite the warmth of the autumn afternoon, dark trousers tucked into boots that had walked through hell and back, the leather cracked and the soles worn nearly through. On his hip hung a Colt revolver, the handle worn smooth by years of use, the metal dull with neglect. He had not drawn it in 3 years. He prayed to whatever God might still be listening that he would never draw it again. The saloon door creaked as he pushed it open, the hinges protesting like old bones. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey, underlaid with something sour that might have been spilled beer or might have been despair. 3 men sat at a table near the window, playing cards with the mechanical motions of men who had nothing better to do. They looked up when he entered, their eyes tracking him with the wariness of prey animals, then returned to their game. A woman stood behind the bar, polishing glasses with a rag that had seen better days. She was perhaps 40, with iron grey hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that suggested she had stopped expecting good things from life a long time ago. She looked up when he entered, and her eyes narrowed with the suspicion that small towns breed in their inhabitants like a disease. "Help you?" she asked. Her voice was flat, unwelcoming. Elijah walked to the bar, his boots making soft sounds on the sawdust-covered floor. He moved carefully, deliberately, the way a man moves when he is used to being watched. When he reached the bar, he set down a coin. It was worn and scratched, but it was real silver, and the woman's eyes flickered with interest before the suspicion returned. "Whiskey," he said. His voice was low and rough, like gravel scraped across stone. "And information." She poured the drink, a measure of amber liquid that looked like it had been distilled in someone's bathtub, and slid it toward him. "Information costs more than whiskey." He did not smile. He had forgotten how. "I'm looking for work, any kind. Ranching, building, doesn't matter, as long as it's honest." The woman laughed. It was not a kind sound. It was the laugh of someone who had heard every lie the world had to offer and had stopped believing in anything. "Honest work? Mister, You came to the wrong town. Why's that? She glanced at the men by the window, a quick, nervous movement that told him more than words could have. Then she lowered her voice, leaning slightly across the bar, because the only man hiring around here is Cyrus Blackwell, and there ain't nothing honest about him. The name meant nothing to Elijah, but the way she said it meant everything. He had heard that tone before, in other towns, from other frightened people. It was the sound of a community held hostage by a man with too much power and no conscience. The sound of fear that had settled into the bones and become a way of life. Who is he? Owns the biggest ranch in the territory, the Blackwell spread, 20,000 acres and growing every season. She glanced again at the window, as if expecting someone to materialize there. He wants it all. Every piece of land, every drop of water, every blade of grass. And he gets what he wants. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. One way or another. Elijah finished his drink in a single swallow. It burned going down, raw and harsh. But it was the first whiskey he had tasted in weeks, and he welcomed the fire. There must be someone else. Smaller ranches, homesteaders. The woman's face softened just a fraction, the hard lines around her eyes easing into something that might have been pity, or might have been recognition of a kindred spirit. There's one. The Mercer place. 3 miles east of town. Follow the creek until you see the cottonwoods. Widow woman runs it. Sarah Mercer. 2 children, a girl and a boy. She's been holding on for 2 years since her husband died. But Blackwell wants that land bad. Water rights. The creek runs right through her property, and without it, half his cattle would die of thirst come summer. She hiring? She can't afford to hire anyone. She can barely afford to feed her kids. The woman shook her head, and for a moment something like admiration flickered in her eyes. But she's stubborn. I'll give her that. Most people would have sold out by now. Not her. She says she promised her husband she'd keep the land, that she'd raise their children on it, that she'd make something of the life they built together. And she means to keep that promise, even if it kills her. Elijah stood and adjusted his hat, pulling it low over his eyes again. Much obliged for the information. Stranger. Her voice stopped him at the door, and he paused, one hand on the weathered wood. Whatever you're running from, it'll catch up eventually. Always does. He did not turn around. He did not need to see her face to know what expression it wore. He had seen it 1,000 times, on 1,000 faces, in 1,000 towns. The expression of someone who recognized a fellow traveler on the road to nowhere. I know, he said, and he walked out into the fading afternoon light. The road to the Mercer place wound through country that seemed designed to break a man's heart with its beauty. Rolling hills, covered in golden grass that rippled in the wind like waves on a landlocked ocean. Stands of cottonwood and aspen, their leaves just beginning to turn. Patches of yellow and orange against the deep green of the pines. The creek the woman had mentioned, clear and cold, tumbling over rocks worn smooth by centuries of patient water. Mountains in the distance, their peaks already dusted with the first snows of the coming winter. It was the kind of land a man could fall in love with. The kind of land that made promises it might not be able to keep. Elijah followed the creek for nearly an hour, letting his horse drink when it wanted, stopping twice to fill his canteen. The water was sweet and cold, tasting of snowmelt and pine, and it reminded him of another creek, in another lifetime, where he had sat with Margaret on a summer afternoon and planned their future. A future that had never come. He pushed the memory away. He had become good at that over the years. Good at closing doors in his mind, locking away the things that hurt too much to remember. It was the only way to keep moving. The only way to survive. The Mercer homestead sat in a shallow valley where the grass grew green and the water ran clear. A small house with a pitched roof and a stone chimney, smoke rising from it in a thin grey thread. A barn that needed paint, the red faded to pink in patches, the doors hanging slightly crooked on their hinges. A corral with 6 horses, good animals, well fed despite the evident poverty of the place. A handful of cattle grazing in the pasture beyond, their coats sleek in the autumn light. It was the kind of place a man could build a life. The kind of place Elijah had once dreamed of having. Before everything went wrong, he dismounted at the fence and waited. It was the polite thing to do. You did not approach a woman's home unannounced. Not in this country. Not if you wanted to keep breathing. The door opened after a long minute, and she stepped onto the porch with a rifle in her hands. She held it like she knew how to use it, the stock braced against her shoulder, the barrel steady despite its weight. Her eyes were green as spring leaves, fierce and unafraid, the eyes of a woman who had faced down fear and refused to blink. Her hair was the color of autumn wheat, pulled back in a practical braid that hung over one shoulder. She was perhaps 30 years old, and beautiful in the way that hardship sometimes makes people beautiful. Stripped of everything soft and unnecessary, leaving only strength, only will, only the determination to survive. "That's far enough," she said. Her voice was clear and strong, with no tremor of fear in it. "State your business." "Name's Elijah Cole." He kept his hands visible, away from his gun. "I heard you might need help with your ranch." "Who told you that?" "Woman at the saloon in town." She studied him for a long moment, and he let her. He understood the need to take the measure of a stranger. Her eyes moved from his face to his horse to the gun on his hip, and he saw her take in the details. The way he stood, balanced and ready despite his obvious exhaustion. The scars on his hands, pale lines that spoke of old violence. The quietness of a man who had seen too much and learned to keep his thoughts behind a wall of silence. "I can't pay you," she said finally. "I got nothing but this land and my children. If it's money you're after, you'd best look elsewhere." "I don't need much. A place to sleep, food to eat, honest work to do." "Why?" It was a simple question. It deserved a simple answer. But the truth was anything but simple. And the whole truth was something he could not speak. Not yet, maybe not ever. So Elijah gave her the only answer he could. "Because I'm tired of running. And this seems like a good place to stop." Something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, understanding, the look of someone who knows what it means to carry a burden too heavy for words. Who knows what it feels like to wake every morning with the weight of the world on your shoulders and go to sleep every night wondering if tomorrow will finally be the day it crushes you. "I'm Sarah Mercer," she said. "The barn's got a room in the back. It ain't much, just a cot and a stove, but it's dry. You can start in the morning. Fence needs mending on the north pasture. Half the posts are rotted through, and the wires rusted near to breaking." "Yes, Mom." She lowered the rifle, but did not put it away. Her eyes remained watchful, and he knew she had not yet decided to trust him. That was wise. Trust was a luxury that got people killed in country like this. "I should warn you," she said. "There's a man named Cyrus Blackwell who wants this land. He sent men before, to threaten me, to scare me off, to make it clear what happens to people who don't do what he wants." Her voice hardened. "If you stay here, you'll be in his sights too. I've been in worse sights. I don't doubt it." She paused, and for a moment her voice softened, the steel giving way to something more human. "The children are inside. Emma is 8. Thomas is 6. They lost their father 2 years ago. They've been through enough. They don't trust easily. Neither do I." She almost smiled. Almost. The ghost of an expression that suggested she had once known how to be happy. Then we should get along just fine." She turned and went back inside, and Elijah led his horse to the barn. The room in back was exactly as she had described it. Small, spare, but clean. A narrow cot, with a wool blanket folded at the foot. A cast-iron stove, cold now but with wood stacked beside it. A single window that looked out on the pasture, where the cattle moved like slow brown shadows in the gathering dusk. He unsaddled his horse and rubbed it down, then fed it from the oats he found in a bin by the door. The animal was asleep before he finished, its head drooping, its breathing slow and peaceful. Elijah wished he could sleep like that, without dreams, without memories, without waking in the dark, reaching for a woman who was no longer there. That night, he lay on the straw mattress and listened to the wind. He thought about the woman with green eyes and the children he had not yet met. He thought about the land that stretched out under the stars, peaceful and quiet, untouched by the violence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. And he thought about the war. He always thought about the war. It had been 14 years since Appomattox. 14 years since he had put down his rifle and sworn never to kill again. But the memories remained, vivid as photographs, sharp as broken glass. The faces of the men he had shot, frozen in the moment of their deaths. The screams of the dying, echoing across fields turned to mud by blood and rain. The smell of gunpowder and rotting flesh that seemed to have seeped into his skin and would never wash away. He had been a sharpshooter for the Union Army, one of the best they had. They had called him Dead-Eye Cole, and the name had been both a compliment and a curse. He could hit a target at 500 yards. He could fire and reload faster than any man in his regiment. He could lie still for hours in brush or rubble, waiting for the perfect shot, patient as death itself. He had killed more men than he could count. Confederates mostly, but some others too. Officers who led their men into slaughter. Scouts who got too close to Union lines. Once, a drummer boy who could not have been more than 14, mistaken for a messenger in the smoke and chaos of battle. That one haunted him still. After the war, he had tried to build a normal life. He had met a woman named Margaret, sweet and gentle, with a laugh like church bells and eyes the color of summer sky. She had seen something in him that he could not see in himself, something worth saving, something worth loving. They had married in the spring of 1866, in a small ceremony at the church in her hometown. They had bought a farm in Missouri, 100 acres of good land with a creek running through it. They had dreamed of children, of growing old together, of putting the past behind them, and building something new. But the past would not stay buried. The men came on a summer night 3 years ago. 4 of them, brothers of a Confederate soldier Elijah had killed at Gettysburg. They had spent 12 years tracking him, nursing their hatred, planning their revenge. They came while Elijah was in town buying supplies, and they found Margaret alone. By the time he got home, there was nothing left. The farmhouse was a pile of ash and embers. The barn was burning, the animals screaming inside, and Margaret. Margaret lay in the yard, her dress torn, her face peaceful in death, her eyes staring at a sky she could no longer see. He buried her under the oak tree where they used to sit on summer evenings, watching the fireflies dance in the meadow. He carved her name into the bark, along with the words, "Beloved wife." Then he went to the shed, dug up the gun he had buried when he married her, and started walking. It took him 8 months to find them all. 8 months of tracking and hunting, of cold nights and colder mornings, of living like an animal on the trail of prey. The first one died in a bar fight in Kansas City, too drunk to even reach for his gun. The second died in a hotel room in Denver, shot through the heart while he slept. The third died on a mountain trail in Montana, tumbling down a cliff with Elijah's bullet in his back. The fourth and last, the leader, the one who had organized the whole thing, died in a small town in Wyoming, facing Elijah across a dusty street as the sun set behind the mountains. And when it was done, when the last one lay dead at his feet with the blood pooling beneath him, Elijah realized something terrible. Something that cracked open the last wall he had built around his heart and let the darkness come flooding in. The killing had not brought her back. The revenge had not eased the pain. All it had done was add more blood to his hands, more faces to haunt his dreams, more weight to the burden he already could not carry. So he had holstered his gun and started walking. 3 years of wandering, 3 years of trying to outrun the ghosts, working odd jobs when he needed money, sleeping in barns and under bridges, talking to no one, trusting no one, waiting for the day when the emptiness inside him finally swallowed him whole. And now he was here, in a place called Clearwater, working for a widow with green eyes and children who needed a father. It was not redemption. He knew better than to hope for that. But maybe, just maybe, it was a start. Morning came grey and cold, with frost on the grass and mist rising from the creek like the breath of some sleeping giant. Elijah was already awake, already dressed, when Sarah emerged from the house with a cup of coffee in her hands. She was wearing a simple dress, faded blue, and a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. Her hair was still in its braid, but loose strands had escaped to frame her face, and in the pale morning light she looked young. Younger than her years, younger than her burdens. "You're an early riser," she said. "Old habit. War teaches you to sleep light and wake fast." She handed him the cup. Their fingers touched for a moment, and she pulled back quickly as if burned. Color rose in her cheeks, and she looked away, toward the mountains, where the sun was just beginning to paint the peaks with gold. "Breakfast is in an hour. The children will be up by then. I'll start on the fence." She nodded and turned to go, then stopped, one hand on the porch railing. "Mr. Cole, I need you to understand something. This land is all I have. It's all my children have. Everything their father worked for, everything he dreamed of, is tied up in this dirt and these buildings and these animals. I will die before I give it up. I understand. Do you?" She turned back to face him, and there was fire in her eyes. "Because Blackwell's men don't play fair. They'll try to scare you off first. Threats, intimidation, the kind of thing that makes most men decide the job isn't worth the trouble. And when that doesn't work, they'll try to hurt you. And when that doesn't work, they'll try to kill you." Elijah sipped the coffee. It was strong and black, the way he liked it. The way Margaret used to make it, on cold mornings when the farm was quiet and the whole day stretched ahead of them like a promise. "Mrs. Mercer," he said quietly, "I spent 4 years in a war that killed more men than anyone thought possible. I've seen battlefields where the bodies were stacked 3 deep and the rivers ran red with blood. I spent 3 years hunting the men who murdered my wife, and I found every last one of them. I've been shot, stabbed, beaten, and left for dead more times than I care to remember." He met her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her take a step back. Not fear, recognition. The recognition of a kindred spirit. "Whatever Blackwell sends, I've seen worse." She stared at him for a long moment, the steam from his coffee rising between them like a veil. Then she said something he did not expect. "What was her name?" "Margaret." "Did you love her, more than anything in this world or the next?" Sarah nodded slowly, and some of the tension went out of her shoulders. "Then I'm sorry for your loss, Mr. Cole. Truly sorry. And I'm glad you're here." She walked back to the house, and Elijah stood alone in the morning cold, holding a cup of coffee and feeling something he had not felt in a very long time. Hope. The fence on the north pasture was in even worse shape than Sarah had described. Half the posts were rotted at the base, eaten away by years of rain and snow and the slow, patient work of decay. The wire was rusted nearly through in places, barely holding together. A joke of a barrier that would not stop a determined rabbit, let alone the cattle it was meant to contain. It was a full day's work just to assess the damage, and Elijah knew it would take at least a week to repair it properly. He did not mind. There was something peaceful about the work, the rhythm of the hammer, the bite of the wire cutters, the solid feel of new wood under his hands. It was honest labor, the kind that left you tired in a good way, the kind that earned the sleep that came after, and it gave him time to think, or rather, time not to think, time to let his mind go quiet and focus only on the task in front of him. The children watched him from a distance for the first 3 days. He could feel their eyes on his back as he worked, curious and suspicious in equal measure. Emma was the bolder of the two, venturing closer each day, studying him with an intensity that reminded him of her mother. Thomas hung back, half hidden behind his sister, peeking out at the stranger who had invaded their world. Elijah did not push. He understood their caution. He had been a child once, in what seemed like another lifetime, and he remembered what it felt like to have the ground shift beneath your feet, to have the people you loved torn away without warning, to look at every new face and wonder if this would be the one that brought more pain. So he worked, and he waited, and he let them come to him in their own time. It was Emma who spoke first, on the 4th day. He was in the barn, mucking out the stalls when she appeared in the doorway. The afternoon sun was behind her, turning her red hair into a halo of fire, and for a moment she looked like something out of a painting, a portrait of childhood, fierce and fragile and beautiful. "You're doing it wrong," she said. Elijah paused and looked at her. "Am I?" "Pa used to start from the back, work his way forward. That way you don't step in what you already cleaned." "Smart man, your pa. He was the smartest man in the whole world." Her chin came up, defiant, daring him to disagree. "He could do anything, fix anything. He built this barn with his own hands, every board, every nail. Ma helped, but he did most of it." Elijah set down the pitchfork and turned to face her fully. She was small for her age, thin in the way that children get when food is scarce, but there was strength in her, a core of steel that had been forged in the furnace of loss. He recognized it because he had the same thing inside himself. How long ago did he pass? 2 years, 3 months, and 17 days. She said it without hesitation, as if she had been counting every one. "It was a riding accident. That's what Ma tells people. That's what she told us." Elijah heard what she did not say, the doubt in her voice, the questions that gnawed at her in the dark of night. She was too young to know such things, but the world did not care about what children should or should not know. It taught its lessons without mercy. "Come here," he said quietly. She approached slowly, wary as a wild creature, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. When she was close enough, he knelt down so that his eyes were level with hers. Up close, he could see the freckles scattered across her nose, the determined set of her jaw, the shadow of grief that lurked behind her fierce green eyes. "What's your name?" he asked. Emma Mercer. And you're Mr. Elijah Cole. I heard Ma talking about you." "Just Elijah is fine. Ma says I should call grown-ups by their proper names. She says it's respectful." "Your Ma is a wise woman. But between you and me, I'm not much for formality. Call me whatever feels right." She considered this, her head tilted to one side like a bird examining something curious. "Mr. Elijah, then. That's in between." "Fair enough. Are you going to leave?" The question came out suddenly, as if it had been pressing against her lips for days. "Everyone leaves. The last man who came to help stayed 2 weeks. Then Blackwell's men came, and he ran away in the night. Didn't even say goodbye. Ma cried after he left, even though she pretended she didn't. Elijah felt something tighten in his chest, the casual cruelty of it, the way this child had learned to expect abandonment, the way she had armored herself against hope because hope was too painful to bear. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, "not unless your mother asks me to." Promise? It was a heavy word. He knew it. She knew it. Children understand promises better than adults. They know the weight of words, the cost of broken faith. They have not yet learned to make promises lightly or break them without consequence. "I promise." She studied his face for a long moment, searching for the lie. She did not find it because it was not there. Whatever else Elijah Cole might be, he was a man who kept his word. It was one of the few things he had left. "Thomas is scared of you," she said, finally. "He thinks you look like a gunfighter, like the men in the stories Pa used to tell us. I used to be a gunfighter, a long time ago." "Are you going to shoot the bad men?" Elijah stood and picked up the pitchfork. "I'm going to try very hard not to shoot anyone." Violence isn't something to wish for, Emma. It's ugly, and it hurts, and it leaves scars that never really heal. He paused, looking out through the barn door at the pasture beyond, where the cattle grazed in peaceful ignorance of the threats that surrounded them. "But I will keep you safe, you and your brother and your mother. That's a promise, too." Emma considered this. Her expression was solemn, far too old for her years, but there was something else there, too. A tiny spark of something that might have been relief, or trust, or the beginning of hope. "I'll tell Thomas," she said. "He worries too much. Ma says he has a tender heart." "Nothing wrong with a tender heart. The world needs more of them." She turned and ran back to the house, her braids flying behind her, her bare feet kicking up little puffs of dust. And Elijah went back to work, starting from the back of the barn, just like her father used to do. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Up before dawn to feed the animals. Breakfast with Sarah and the children. Quiet meals where they passed bread and butter and tried to pretend they were a normal family. Long hours of work on the fence, the corral, the barn, the 100 small tasks that a ranch requires. Supper as the sun went down. And then the long, quiet evenings when the children did their lessons, and Sarah mended clothes by lamplight, and Elijah sat on the porch, watching the stars wheel overhead. Thomas began to warm to him first. The boy was curious about everything, full of questions about horses and cattle and the stars in the sky. Why did horses sleep standing up? How did cows know which grass was good to eat? Were the stars really suns, like the preacher said? Or were they holes in the sky where God's light shone through? Elijah answered as best he could, surprised by how much he remembered from his own childhood, from the father who had taught him to ride, and the mother who had shown him the constellations on summer nights. He found himself enjoying the boy's company, the endless questions, the wonder at things that adults had long since stopped noticing. One afternoon, he took Thomas to the corral and showed him how to approach a horse properly. The boy was nervous at first, trembling as he reached out to touch the soft muzzle of the bay mare, but his face lit up with pure joy when the horse nuzzled his palm, looking for the sugar cube Elijah had given him. "She likes me," Thomas exclaimed. "She really likes me." "Of course she does. You've got a gentle hand and a kind heart. Horses can sense that." "Can I ride her? Please, Mr. Elijah, can I ride her?" Elijah glanced toward the house, where Sarah was watching from the window. She nodded once, a small smile on her face, and he felt something warm unfurl in his chest. "Climb up here," he said, lifting the boy onto the mare's back. "Hold the mane, just like this. That's right. Now I'm going to lead her around the corral. You just focus on keeping your balance." They walked in slow circles while Thomas laughed with delight, his fear forgotten, his whole face shining with happiness. And Elijah remembered another time, another child, a ghost of the future that had never been. The children he and Margaret had dreamed of having. The sons and daughters who would have run through the fields of their farm, who would have learned to ride and rope and grow, who would have carried their legacy into the years ahead. Those children had died with Margaret. But perhaps there was still time to be something. Not a father. He did not deserve that title. But something. A protector, a teacher, a man who kept his promises. Emma took longer to trust him fully. She watched everything with those sharp green eyes, so like her mother's, and she did not give her faith easily. But slowly, grudgingly, she began to let down her guard. She helped him with the animals, learning to muck out stalls and carry water without complaint. She told him stories about her father, about the games they used to play and the songs he used to sing. And one evening, she brought him a drawing she had made, a picture of a man on a horse beneath a yellow sun. "That's you," she said, holding it out with a mixture of pride and nervousness. "I made it during lessons. Ma said I should be practicing my letters, but I wanted to draw instead." Elijah took the drawing and looked at it carefully. The horse was gray, like his. The man wore a brown coat and a wide-brimmed hat. The sun was bright and yellow, and there was grass beneath the horse's hooves, and a small house in the corner that he recognized as the Mercer homestead. "It's beautiful," he said, and he meant it. "Thank you, Emma. I'll keep it always." She smiled then, a real smile, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, chasing away the shadows, revealing the child she should have been allowed to be. The child she would be if Elijah had anything to say about it. That night, he sat on his cot and looked at the drawing by candlelight, and he felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen for 3 years, 3 lifetimes, since the night Margaret died. Something he had thought was dead and buried along with her. But it was not dead. It was only sleeping, and it was beginning to wake. Sarah watched these changes from a distance. She saw the way her children opened up to this quiet stranger, the way they laughed when he told them stories, the way they followed him around the ranch like ducklings following their mother. She saw the care he took with the animals, the attention he paid to every detail, the pride he took in work well done. And she felt something stirring in her own heart, something she had buried with her husband 2 years ago. It frightened her. James had been the love of her life, her childhood sweetheart, the boy who had courted her with wildflowers and poetry, who had promised her the moon and the stars and had done his best to deliver them. They had built this ranch together, board by board and nail by nail, working side by side through drought and blizzard and all the challenges the frontier could throw at them. When he died, a part of her had died with him. She had mourned him for months, crying herself to sleep every night, wondering how she could possibly go on. But she had gone on, for the children, for the land, for the promise she had made to him as he lay dying in her arms. "Keep the ranch," he had whispered. "Raise our children here. Don't let them take what we built." She had kept that promise, even when it meant going hungry so the children could eat. Even when it meant facing down Blackwell's men with nothing but a rifle and a prayer. Even when every fiber of her being screamed at her to give up, to sell, to take the children somewhere safe and leave this cursed land behind. And now, there was this man. This stranger with his haunted eyes and his gentle hands. This killer who read stories to her children and fixed her fence and looked at her in a way that made her feel things she had thought she would never feel again. She was not ready. Not yet. The wounds were still too fresh, the fear still too strong. So she kept her distance, kept her guard up, and told herself it was for the best. But at night, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, she found herself standing at the window, looking out at the barn where a single candle burned, wondering what he was thinking, wondering what it would feel like to not be alone. The trouble came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after Elijah arrived. He was in the north pasture, fitting the last of the new fence posts into the holes he had dug when he saw the riders coming. 3 of them, approaching from the west, moving fast. Their horses kicked up clouds of dust that caught the afternoon light, and even from this distance, Elijah could see that these were not working men. They wore the kind of clothes that cost money, clean and new, and they carried themselves with the arrogance of men who had never been told no. Elijah kept working, but his hand moved closer to his gun. They stopped 20 feet away, horses stamping and snorting in the afternoon heat. The leader was a young man, perhaps 25, with a cruel smile and cold eyes. He had the look of someone who enjoyed causing pain, who got pleasure from the fear he saw in other people's faces. The other 2 were older, hard-faced men, with the scarred hands and watchful eyes of experienced fighters. "You the new hand?" the young man asked. "I am. Name's Cutter, Jeb Cutter. I ride for Mr. Blackwell." He leaned forward in his saddle, and his smile widened. "Mr. Blackwell wanted me to deliver a message. The widows got until the end of the month to sell. After that, things are going to get unpleasant." Elijah drove another nail into the fence post, his movements slow and deliberate. "Unpleasant how?" "Use your imagination." Cutter grinned, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect. "Accidents happen out here. Fires start, fences get cut, cattle wander off and don't come back. People get hurt." His eyes glittered with anticipation. "Children get hurt." Elijah stopped working. He turned slowly to face the 3 riders, and something in his eyes made Cutter's smile falter. There was a stillness about him now, a coiled readiness that spoke of years of violence, the look of a predator deciding whether to strike. "Let me give you a message to take back to your boss," Elijah said. His voice was quiet, but it carried like thunder before a storm. "This land belongs to Mrs. Mercer. It belonged to her husband before her, and it will belong to her children after her. She is not selling, not today, not at the end of the month, not ever." Cutter recovered his composure and laughed, but there was an edge to it now, a nervousness that had not been there before. "Big talk from a hired hand. You got any idea who you're dealing with? Mr. Blackwell owns half this territory. He's got judges in his pocket and politicians on his payroll. He could crush you like a bug and no one would say a word." "A coward," Elijah said calmly. "That's who I'm dealing with. A coward who sends boys to threaten women and children." Cutter's face flushed with anger. "Watch your mouth, old man. I've killed men for less." Elijah took a step forward, and the horses shifted nervously, sensing the danger that their riders were only beginning to understand. "I've killed better men than you for a lot less. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn around and ride back to your boss. You're going to tell him that the Mercer Ranch is protected now, and if I see you or any of Blackwell's men on this property again, I will bury you where you stand." The silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Cutter's hand moved toward his gun, an instinctive reaction, but something in Elijah's stance made him stop. There was a stillness to the older man, a patience that spoke of absolute certainty. He had made this threat before, many times, and he had always followed through. "This ain't over," Cutter said finally, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Not by a long shot. Mr. Blackwell doesn't take kindly to being talked to like that. He'll make you pay. He'll make all of you pay. It's over when I say it's over. Now get off this land." They left. But Elijah knew they would be back. Men like Blackwell did not give up easily. They pushed and pushed until something broke, until someone broke. He had seen it before, in towns across the frontier, the powerful consuming the weak, one piece at a time, until there was nothing left but dust and broken dreams. He finished the fence and walked back to the house, where Sarah stood on the porch with the rifle in her hands. Her face was pale, her knuckles white where they gripped the stock, but her eyes were steady. "I heard," she said. "You shouldn't have provoked them. Now they'll come back angrier than before. They threatened your children." "I know, but now they'll come back. More of them, maybe Blackwell himself." Elijah climbed the porch steps and stopped in front of her. She was trembling, though whether from fear or anger he could not tell. Perhaps both. Perhaps the same complex mixture of emotions that churned inside his own chest. "Mrs. Mercer, Sarah." It was the first time he had used her given name, and he saw her eyes widen slightly at the intimacy of it. "I meant what I said. I'm not leaving, and I'm not letting them hurt you or your children. Not while I draw breath. You can't fight them all. Blackwell has a dozen men, maybe more, and they're killers, Elijah. Professionals. They've done this before, driven families off their land, and no one has ever stopped them. Then I'll have to be smart about it." He looked out at the land, at the creek glittering in the afternoon sun, at the mountains rising purple in the distance. "This place is worth fighting for. Your husband knew it. You know it. And now I know it too." Sarah lowered the rifle. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, and her voice was thick when she spoke. "Why do you care so much? You only just got here. You don't owe us anything. You could walk away right now and never look back, and no one would blame you." Elijah thought about the question. He thought about Margaret, and the farm they had lost, and the children they had never had. He thought about the years of wandering, the emptiness, the endless search for something to believe in. And he thought about Emma's drawing, folded carefully in his pocket, close to his heart. "Because I've been looking for a reason to stop running," he said quietly. "And I think I finally found one." That night, he told her everything. They sat on the porch after the children were asleep, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the stars wheel overhead in their ancient, eternal dance. The night was still and quiet, the only sounds the distant call of an owl and the soft rustle of wind through the cottonwoods. It was the kind of night made for confession, the kind of night when secrets slip free of their chains and speak themselves into the darkness. And so Elijah talked. He told her about the war, about the battlefields he had walked, the men he had killed, the nightmares that still woke him in the dead of night with the taste of blood in his mouth. He told her about the things he had done that he could never undo, the choices that had seemed necessary at the time and now seemed monstrous. He told her about the boy drummer, the one who haunted him more than all the others, the one whose face he saw every time he closed his eyes. He told her about Margaret, about the way she laughed, like church bells on a summer morning, about the farm they had built together, the dreams they had shared, the future they had planned, about the night the men came, and the ashes he had found when he came home, and the grave he had dug with his own hands, while the tears froze on his cheeks. He told her about the hunt, 8 months of tracking and killing, of becoming the thing he had sworn never to be again. About finding the last man and watching him die and feeling nothing. Nothing but emptiness, nothing but the terrible realization that revenge could not fill the hole inside him. That the blood he had spilled was just more weight on a soul already crushed beneath its burden. He told her about the 3 years of wandering, the towns he had passed through, the jobs he had worked, the faces he had seen and forgotten, about the endless search for something, anything, that might give his life meaning again, about giving up hope again and again, and still waking each morning to face another pointless day. And he told her why he had stayed, why a woman with green eyes and 2 children who needed protecting had seemed like an answer to a prayer he no longer had the faith to pray. When he finished, the silence between them was different than before. Deeper, more intimate. The silence of 2 people who have shown each other their scars and found acceptance rather than judgment. "You've been carrying that for a long time," Sarah said at last. Her voice was soft, gentle, the voice of someone who understood pain. "Yes." "Does it ever get lighter? The weight of it?" "No." He stared out at the darkness, at the mountains that were invisible now, swallowed by the night. "But you learn to walk with it. You learn to keep moving, one step at a time, even when every step feels like it might be your last." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "James died in a riding accident. That's what I tell people. That's what I tell the children." She paused, and he heard her take a shaky breath. "But it's not the truth. The truth is, Blackwell's men spooked his horse, drove him into a ravine on purpose, to scare us, to show us what would happen if we didn't sell. They wanted to frighten us into giving up. Instead, they killed my husband." Elijah felt a cold fury settle in his chest, a familiar feeling, a dangerous feeling. "You know this for certain." "I know what I saw. I was on the ridge above, looking for a stray calf. I saw them ride at him, shouting and firing their guns in the air. I saw his horse panic, saw it run for the edge. I saw James try to turn, try to stop, and I saw him go over." Her hands tightened on the blanket around her shoulders. "I saw the looks on their faces when they rode away. They were laughing, Elijah. Laughing. Did you tell anyone?" "Who would I tell? The sheriff? Blackwell owns him. The judge? Same thing. Everyone in this territory is either afraid of Blackwell or in his pocket." Her voice cracked, and he saw the tears streaming down her face, silver in the starlight. "And 3 days later, 3 days after I buried my husband, Blackwell rode up to this house and offered to buy our land, at a fraction of what it's worth. He sat on that porch and told me how sorry he was for my loss, and I could see the smile he was hiding. I could see the victory in his eyes. "Why didn't you leave?" Elijah asked gently. "Take the children somewhere safe." "Because this was James's dream. This land, this life. Everything he worked for is here, in this dirt, in these buildings. Leaving felt like letting them win, like letting him die for nothing." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a fierce, angry gesture. "So I stayed. I took his rifle, and I learned to shoot, and I swore on his grave that no one would take this land from me. Not Blackwell. Not anyone." Elijah reached out and took her hand. It was cold from the night air, trembling slightly, but she did not pull away. She looked at him, and in the starlight, her eyes were luminous, full of pain and hope and something else he was afraid to name. "You're not alone anymore," he said quietly. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." "Together," she repeated, as if testing the word, feeling its weight. Then she squeezed his hand, and for a moment, everything else fell away. The fear, the grief, the uncertainty of the future. There was only this: two broken people finding each other in the darkness, learning to trust again. They did not go inside. They sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the night pass. And when dawn came, painting the sky with shades of rose and gold, they were still there. Still together. Still holding on. The weeks that followed were tense but quiet. Elijah kept watch, patrolling the boundaries of the ranch during the day, sleeping light at night with his gun close at hand. He taught Sarah to shoot better, to reload faster, to keep her head in a crisis. He taught the children to hide, to run, to find safety if danger came. He hoped they would never need these lessons. He knew they probably would. But Blackwell's men did not return. Not yet. They were waiting for something, planning something. In the meantime, life on the ranch continued. The cattle grew fat on the autumn grass. The last of the fence was repaired, the corral expanded, the barn given a fresh coat of paint that Emma helped apply with more enthusiasm than skill. The children laughed and played, and the shadow of fear that had hung over the homestead began, slowly, to lift. And between Elijah and Sarah, something began to grow. It started with small things, a lingering glance across the dinner table, a touch that lasted a moment too long when passing the bread, the way she smiled when he made the children laugh, or the way he felt when she brought him coffee in the morning, their fingers brushing as she handed him the cup. They did not speak of it. They were both too cautious, too wounded, too afraid of what might be lost if they reached for what they wanted. But it was there, growing quietly in the spaces between words. A flower pushing up through cracked soil, a star emerging from behind dark clouds. Emma noticed first. "Ma," she said one evening, watching Elijah help Thomas with his reading at the kitchen table. "Are you sweet on Mr. Elijah?" Sarah nearly dropped the pot she was carrying. "Emma Jane Mercer, what kind of question is that?" "A good one." Emma's expression was serious, adult beyond her years. "You look at him the way you used to look at Pa, before he died. Your face gets soft, and your eyes get kind of shiny." Sarah set down the pot and knelt beside her daughter. "Things are complicated, sweetheart. Mr. Elijah is a good man, and I'm grateful he's here. But your father... I loved your father very much. I'm not ready to. Pa's not coming back." Emma's voice was matter-of-fact, with the brutal honesty of children. "He's dead, and he'd want us to be happy. He told me that once, when he was sick with the fever. He said if anything ever happened to him, he wanted us to find someone who would take care of us. Someone good." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I've been practicing." Sarah laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised her. She hugged her daughter tight and looked over at Elijah, who was pretending not to listen, but clearly failing. His eyes met hers, and for a moment the room seemed to hold its breath. "We'll see," she said. "We'll see." But the peace could not last. They both knew it. They were living on borrowed time, waiting for the storm that was surely coming. It came on a cold November morning, when the first real snows began to dust the mountain peaks. Elijah was in the barn, saddling his horse for the morning patrol, when he heard the riders approaching. A lot of riders this time. He counted 8 before he lost track in the dust they raised. He stepped out of the barn and saw them arrayed across the yard in a ragged line. Cutter was there, wearing an ugly grin that promised violence. And beside him, mounted on a black stallion that must have cost more than most men made in a year, was a man who could only be Cyrus Blackwell. He was older than Elijah had expected. 60, perhaps, with silver hair and a face like carved granite. He dressed like a gentleman, with a fine coat and polished boots, and a watch chain of heavy gold across his vest, but his eyes held the cold calculation of a predator. A man who had built an empire on the bones of others, and did not intend to stop now. "Mr. Cole." Blackwell's voice was smooth as oil on water. "I've heard a lot about you." "Wish I could say the same." Blackwell smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I'm here to make a reasonable offer. The widow's had 2 years to grieve. It's time for her to move on. Start fresh somewhere else. I'm prepared to pay $10,000 for this land. That's more than generous, considering the condition it's in. The land's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mr. Cole. Everything and everyone has a price." Blackwell leaned forward in his saddle. "I've done some asking about you, Elijah Cole. They called you Deadeye during the war, a sharpshooter with a talent for killing, a man who left bodies from Virginia to Texas and never lost a wink of sleep." His smile widened. "And now you're playing house with a widow and her brats. How touching. The killer finds redemption. It's almost poetic." Elijah felt the old darkness stirring inside him. The thing he had tried so hard to bury, the monster that slept in the basement of his soul, waiting to be awakened. You have 30 seconds to leave this property. Or what? You'll kill us all? Blackwell laughed. There are 8 of us, Mr. Cole. 8 guns against 1. Even Deadeye Cole can't beat those odds. Maybe not. But I guarantee you'll be the first one I shoot, and I never miss. The laughter died in Blackwell's throat. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or recognition. He had looked into the eyes of killers before, and he knew this man was not bluffing. 2 weeks, Blackwell said finally, his voice no longer smooth but hard as flint. 2 weeks to convince the widow to sell. After that, I stopped being reasonable. After that, I stopped caring about making things look like accidents. He turned his horse. Enjoy your time, Mr. Cole. It's running out. He rode away, his men following behind in a cloud of dust. Cutter lingered for a moment, his eyes promising violence, before spurring his horse after the others. Sarah emerged from the house, her face pale as milk. The children were behind her, Emma holding Thomas's hand, both of them wide-eyed with fear. 2 weeks, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. That's not enough time. It's enough. Elijah watched the riders disappear over the hill. His mind was already working, planning, calculating. We need to talk to the people in town, find out if anyone else is willing to stand against Blackwell. Most of them are too scared. They've seen what happens to people who stand up to him. Fear can be overcome. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to stand up first. They rode into town that afternoon, leaving the children with old Mrs. Patterson, the closest neighbor. Clearwater was quiet, with the nervous stillness of a place expecting trouble. The few people on the street hurried past without meeting their eyes. Doors closed as they approached. Curtains twitched in windows. The saloon was nearly empty. Only the barwoman was there, along with a man Elijah did not recognize. He was tall and weathered, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from stone and left out in the weather too long. A sheriff's star was pinned to his vest. "Sheriff Wheeler," Sarah said. "This is Elijah Cole. He's working at my ranch." Wheeler studied Elijah with tired eyes. "I've heard about you. The stranger who ran off Cutter and his boys. They were threatening Mrs. Mercer's children. I don't doubt it. Blackwell's men have been getting bolder lately. But there's not much I can do." Wheeler spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. "I'm one man, Mr. Cole. Blackwell's got a dozen guns on his payroll, maybe more. And the people in this town are too scared to testify to anything. They've seen what happens to witnesses. So you just let him do whatever he wants? You wear that star, and you just stand by while a man like Blackwell destroys innocent people's lives?" "I do what I can." There was anger in Wheeler's voice now, mixed with shame. "But I'm not a fool, Mr. Cole. I know when I'm outgunned. I've got a wife and 2 daughters. If I push too hard, it won't be just me who pays the price." Elijah leaned on the bar. He understood the sheriff's fear. He had seen it before, in countless towns, in countless faces. The fear of powerful men with no conscience. The fear that made good people stand by while evil flourished. What if you weren't alone? What if the people in this town decided to stand together? Wheeler laughed. But it was a bitter sound. "That's a nice dream, Mr. Cole. But these folks have families to protect, businesses to run, lives they've built from nothing. They're not going to risk everything to help one widow keep her land, no matter how much they might sympathize. Maybe they will if someone shows them how." The barwoman, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Her voice was thoughtful, considering. "He might be right, Jim. People are getting tired of Blackwell. The Anderson family sold out last month because they had no choice. The Hendersons before that. The Carlsons are talking about leaving. If it keeps going like this, there won't be anyone left but him. And then what happens to the rest of us? What happens when he decides he wants our land too? Wheeler shook his head. You're talking about armed resistance, Martha. A range war. People will die. People are already dying, Elijah said quietly. James Mercer died, and he won't be the last unless someone stops it. And you think you're the one to stop it? One man against an empire? Not one man, a community. That's what I'm proposing. We gather everyone who's been hurt by Blackwell. Everyone who's afraid of him. Everyone who's tired of living under his boot. We stand together. We show him that this isn't just one stubborn widow he's fighting. It's all of us. Wheeler was silent for a long moment, his eyes moving from Elijah to Sarah to the barwoman and back again. Finally, he spoke. Even if I agreed, even if we could convince people to join us, what then? Blackwell has men, professional killers. What do we have? Numbers, determination, and me. Elijah met the sheriff's eyes. I spent 4 years in the war, Sheriff. I know how to fight. I know how to plan. And I know that a dozen hired guns, no matter how good they are, can't stand against a whole community that's decided to fight back. Wheeler looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Sarah, at the quiet desperation in her eyes, at the strength that kept her standing despite everything she had been through. All right, he said finally. I'm not making any promises, but I'll talk to some people, feel them out, see if there's any appetite for what you're proposing. That's all I ask. They shook hands, and Elijah felt something shift in the air, a change in the wind, the first stirring of hope in a town that had given up on hope long ago. Over the next 4 days, Elijah rode from ranch to ranch, talking to farmers and cattlemen, widows and families. Most were reluctant at first. They had seen what happened to those who defied Blackwell. They had heard the stories, witnessed the destruction, lived in fear for so long that it had become a part of them. But slowly, as Elijah spoke of standing together, of refusing to be driven from their homes, of fighting for the future they had worked so hard to build, something began to change. It was not courage exactly. It was something more basic than that. The realization that they were not alone, that others shared their fear and their anger, that together they might be strong enough to fight back. By the end of the week, Elijah had commitments from 7 families. Not all of them could fight. Some were too old, some too young, some simply not made for violence. But they could help in other ways, providing supplies, sharing information, giving shelter to those who needed it. It was not an army, but it was a start. And in the quiet hours of the night, when the work was done and the children were sleeping and the world was still, Elijah and Sarah talked. They talked about the future, about what they would do if they won, about what they would do if they lost. They talked about their pasts, their regrets, their hopes. They talked about James and Margaret, about the loves they had lost and the pain they still carried. And slowly, carefully, they talked about each other. I never thought I could feel this way again, Sarah said one night, her head resting on his shoulder as they watched the stars. After James died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But then you came, and I don't know what to call it. I don't know if I'm ready to call it anything. But it's there, and it's real, and it scares me. Elijah pulled her closer. It scares me too. I spent 3 years running from everything that mattered. 3 years convincing myself that I didn't deserve happiness, that I didn't deserve love. And then I rode into this valley and saw you standing on that porch with a rifle in your hands, and I knew I was done running. She tilted her head up to look at him. So what do? We fight. We protect what matters. And when the fighting's over, we figure out the rest together. She kissed him then, soft and sweet, a promise and a question all at once. And he kissed her back, and for a moment, Everything else fell away. The fear, the danger, the uncertainty. There was only this, only them, only the beginning of something new. But dawn always comes, and with it, the world and all its troubles. The night before Blackwell's deadline, Elijah could not sleep. He sat on the porch, cleaning his gun by lamplight, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into silence. The cattle lowing in the distance, the horses moving in the corral, the creak of the windmill turning slowly in the night breeze. Sarah came out to join him, wrapped in a shawl against the cold. She sat down beside him and watched him work, her eyes following the practiced movements of his hands. "Are you scared?" she asked. "Yes." "Good. I'd be worried if you weren't." She reached out and took his hand, stilling its motion. "Elijah, there's something I need to say. In case things don't go well tomorrow." "Sarah, please, let me finish." She turned to face him, and her eyes were bright with tears she refused to shed. "I've been alone for 2 years, scared for 2 years, carrying this weight for 2 years, and never once complaining because I knew there was no one to hear me. And then you came, and for the first time since James died, I felt like maybe things could be different. Like maybe I didn't have to carry this burden by myself. You don't. Not anymore. I know. That's what I'm trying to say." She squeezed his hand. "I love you, Elijah Cole. I know it's too soon. I know we've only known each other a few weeks. I know that we might not survive tomorrow, but I love you, and whatever happens, I want you to know that." He looked at her for a long moment, at this brave, beautiful woman who had given him something he thought he had lost forever: hope, purpose, the possibility of a future. "I love you too," he said. "I think I have since the first moment you pointed that rifle at me." She laughed, a sound that broke through the tension like sunlight through clouds, and then she kissed him again, deeper this time, with an urgency that came from knowing that tomorrow might change everything. They did not go inside. They sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets, watching the night pass, holding on to each other, holding on to hope. And when dawn came, grey and cold and heavy with the promise of snow, they were ready. The preparations for the confrontation with Blackwell consumed the days that followed. Each morning, Elijah rose before dawn and rode out to meet with the families who had pledged to stand with them. Each evening, he returned to the Mercer Ranch to plan and prepare and try to ignore the growing knot of fear in his stomach. It was not fear for himself. He had made his peace with death long ago, in the bloody fields of the war, in the months of hunting after Margaret's murder. Death held no terror for him. What terrified him was the thought of failing, of watching Sarah and the children fall because he had not been good enough, smart enough, fast enough. He would not let that happen. He could not. The Patterson family was the first to commit fully. Old man Patterson was 70 if he was a day, but he could still shoot straight, and his 3 grown sons were strong men with steady hands. They arrived at the Mercer Ranch 3 days before the deadline, bringing extra rifles, ammunition, and supplies. "We've had enough of Blackwell," the old man said, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "He killed James Mercer, and everyone knows it, even if no one could prove it. And he's been stealing from the rest of us for years, overcharging for everything, underpaying for our cattle, making sure we never get ahead." He gripped Elijah's hand with surprising strength. It's time someone put a stop to it. The Morrison family came next, a young couple with 2 small children who had been planning to leave before they heard what was happening. "We were going to run," Jake Morrison admitted, shame coloring his cheeks. "Pack up everything and head for California. But when we heard that people were finally standing up, that someone was finally going to fight." He shook his head. "We couldn't leave. Not now. Not when there's finally hope." The widow Henderson brought her oldest boy, a lanky youth of 16 who looked too young to hold a rifle, but swore he would fight if needed. The Carlson brothers came together, twins who had worked for Blackwell once and knew his ranch better than anyone, and half a dozen others, families whose names Elijah was still learning, people who had suffered in silence for too long and were finally ready to speak. They gathered at the Mercer Ranch on the night before the deadline. More than 30 people crowded into the small house and spilling out onto the porch. Sarah made coffee and served what food they had, while Elijah outlined the plan he had been developing. "Blackwell will come with his men," he said, spreading a rough map on the table. "He expects to find us alone and scared. Instead, he's going to find all of us, armed and ready. The key is positioning. We need to surround him before he realizes what's happening." He pointed to the hills around the ranch. "Groups here, here, and here, hidden until I give the signal. When Blackwell and his men arrive, they'll think they're facing just me. They'll be confident, arrogant. That's when the rest of you appear." "What if they start shooting?" someone asked. "They might. That's why we need to be ready. But I don't think they will. Blackwell's men are professionals. They fight for money, not causes. When they see they're outnumbered, when they realize that fighting means dying, most of them will surrender. And if they don't?" Elijah's face hardened. "Then we do what we have to do." The night was long and tense. People slept in shifts, if they slept at all. Elijah walked among them, offering words of encouragement, checking weapons, making sure everyone understood their role. He saw the fear in their eyes, the doubt, the uncertainty. These were farmers and ranchers, shopkeepers and tradesmen. They were not fighters. They had never been fighters. But they were here. They had chosen to stand, and sometimes that was enough. Near midnight, he found Sarah sitting alone on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the darkness. "You should try to sleep," he said, sitting beside her. "I can't. My mind won't stop." She turned to look at him, and he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the worry, the love. "Elijah, what if this doesn't work? What if people get hurt? What if the children don't?" He took her hand, held it tight. "Don't think about that. Think about tomorrow, about what comes after. Think about the life we're going to build together." "I'm trying. But the fear, I know. I feel it too." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "But we're not alone, Sarah. Look around you. All these people came here because they believe in what we're doing. They came here because they're tired of living in fear. That means something. That matters." She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I love you, Elijah Cole. I love you too, Sarah Mercer. More than I have words to say." They sat together until the first light of dawn touched the mountains, watching the darkness slowly give way to gray, then to pink, then to the brilliant gold of sunrise. A new day. A day that would change everything. Inside the house, the children were waking. Emma appeared in the doorway, her face pale but determined. "Is it time?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "Almost. You remember what to do?" "Stay inside with Thomas. Keep away from the windows. If something goes wrong, take him to the root cellar and hide." "That's right. And Emma." He crossed to her and knelt down, meeting her eyes. "I want you to know how proud I am of you. You've been so brave through all of this. Your father would be proud too." Emma's eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "You come back," she said fiercely. "You promised you'd stay. You have to come back. I will. I promise." He hugged her, feeling her small arms tight around his neck, then released her and stood. There was work to do. The morning passed in a blur of activity. People took their positions in the hills, hidden in the brush and behind rocks, their rifles ready. Sheriff Wheeler arrived with 3 deputies he had managed to recruit, men who had been too afraid to act before, but who had found their courage at last. "Word came from town," Wheeler said, pulling Elijah aside. "Blackwell left his ranch at first light. He's got 12 men with him, just like we expected. They'll be here within the hour." "Good. Everything is ready." "Is it?" Wheeler's eyes were serious. "Mr. Cole, I need to ask you something. If this goes wrong, if Blackwell manages to fight his way out, what happens then? To you? To Mrs. Mercer? To all these people who stuck their necks out?" Elijah looked out at the hills, where his makeshift army waited. Farmers and shopkeepers, widows and children. Ordinary people who had decided to do an extraordinary thing. "It won't go wrong," he said. "I won't let it." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one I have." Wheeler studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You know something, Mr. Cole. I've been sheriff of this territory for 15 years. I've seen a lot of men come and go. Brave men, cowardly men, good men, bad men. But I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like you. I'm nothing special, Sheriff. Just a man who's tired of running. Maybe, but you've given these people something they didn't have before. Hope, a reason to believe things can change." He extended his hand. "Whatever happens today, I'm glad I met you." Elijah shook his hand. "Likewise, Sheriff. Likewise." The sound of hoofbeats came an hour later, thundering across the valley like the drums of war. Elijah stood alone in the yard, exactly where he had planned to be, watching the riders approach. His heart was pounding, but his hands were steady. He had been here before, in 100 different variations. The moment before battle, the breath before the plunge, the last instant of peace before everything changed. He thought of Margaret, of the life they had shared and the future they had lost. He thought of Sarah, watching from inside the house, her rifle ready, her heart in her throat. He thought of Emma and Thomas, hidden in the root cellar, praying for their mother and the stranger who had become their father. And he thought of himself, the man he had been, the man he had become, the man he still hoped to be. The riders drew closer, and he saw Blackwell at their head, his silver hair gleaming in the midday sun. The man's face was set in lines of cruel satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought this was the end. He was wrong. Elijah stood tall, his hand resting on his gun, and waited for his moment. The moment when everything would change. The moment when a community would find its voice and a tyrant would fall, and a man who had lost everything would finally find his way home. The rider stopped 20 feet away, and Blackwell's smile was wide and triumphant. "Well, Mr. Cole," he said, "I see you've decided to face your fate like a man. I respect that. Most people beg at the end." Elijah said nothing. He was counting in his head, waiting for the signal. "Nothing to say? No more threats? No more bravado?" Blackwell laughed. "I suppose reality has finally set in. You're one man, Mr. Cole. One man against 12. There's no cavalry coming. No miracle that will save you." "You're right about one thing," Elijah said quietly. "There's no cavalry." He raised his arm, and the signal went out. All around the yard, in the hills, and behind the rocks, and in every hidden position, people rose to their feet. Rifles appeared, shotguns, pistols, a wall of weapons, surrounding Blackwell and his men like the closing of a trap. "But there is a miracle," Elijah continued, his voice carrying across the sudden silence. "It's called community. It's called courage. It's called ordinary people deciding they've had enough." Blackwell's face went pale. His eyes darted from side to side, counting the guns, calculating the odds. For the first time since Elijah had met him, the man looked afraid. This is illegal," he sputtered. "You can't do this. I have rights." "So did James Mercer," Elijah said coldly. So did all the people you've hurt and killed and driven from their homes. You talk about rights, Blackwell, but you've never respected anyone's rights but your own. Sheriff Wheeler rode forward, his star gleaming in the sunlight. Cyrus Blackwell, you're under arrest. You have the right to a trial. You have the right to a lawyer. But right now, you have the right to shut your mouth and come quietly, or so help me God, I will let these good people give you the justice you deserve. The moment stretched. Time seemed to stop. Elijah's hand hovered over his gun, ready for anything. And then Cutter went for his weapon, and everything happened at once. The shot was clean. The fastest Elijah had ever fired, even counting the war. Cutter went down, and the other men froze, and suddenly it was over. Not with a bang, but with a whimper, with the quiet sounds of surrender. They had won. Against all odds, against all expectations, against the tyranny of a man who had seemed unstoppable, they had won. Elijah stood in the yard, breathing hard, and felt something break loose inside him. Something that had been frozen for years, locked away behind walls of grief and guilt and shame. It came flooding out now, warm and bright, filling all the empty spaces. He was not a killer anymore. He was not a wanderer, a drifter, a man without a home. He was Elijah Cole, husband, father, protector. He was home. The riders arrived at noon, just as the sun broke through the clouds that had threatened snow all morning. Blackwell brought all of them this time, 12 men on horseback, heavily armed, their faces hard with purpose. They wore their guns like they knew how to use them, and they rode with the casual arrogance of men who had never been on the losing side of a fight. They spread out across the yard in a ragged line, surrounding the house, cutting off any escape. Blackwell rode to the front, his silver hair gleaming in the winter sun, his fine coat brushed clean of trail dust. He looked like a gentleman come to pay a social call, but his eyes were cold as the grave, and his smile held no warmth at all. "Time's up, Mrs. Mercer," he called out. "I've come for your answer." Elijah stepped off the porch. He had dressed carefully that morning, in clean clothes and his best boots, the way a man dresses when he knows he might die. His gun was at his hip, loaded and ready, and his hand rested on the grip with the casual ease of long habit. "Her answer is no," he said. "Same as before. Same as it will always be." Blackwell's eyes narrowed. "I was hoping you'd see reason, Mr. Cole. I really was. Bloodshed is messy, expensive, bad for business. But if you won't sell, if you insist on this foolishness, then I'll have to take what I want by force. This land is too valuable to let one stubborn widow and one washed-up gunfighter stand in my way. You're not taking anything. Not today. Not ever." "And who's going to stop me?" Blackwell gestured at his men. "There are 12 of us, Mr. Cole. 12 guns against one. Even Deadeye Cole can't beat those odds. Even if you killed half of us, the other half would gun you down, and then we'd ride into that house and finish the job. Is that what you want? To die in the dirt while the woman you love watches?" "I don't expect to die today, Mr. Blackwell." "No? Then you're a fool, as well as a has-been." Elijah smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "Maybe. But I'm not the one who's outnumbered." He nodded toward the hills behind Blackwell, and the rancher turned in his saddle. What he saw made the color drain from his face like water from a broken cup. They were coming from every direction. Riders and wagons, men and women, armed with rifles and shotguns and pistols and anything else that could shoot. The families Elijah had visited over the past week. The neighbors Sarah had known for years. The people of Clearwater who had finally decided that enough was enough. 30 people, maybe more, converging on the Mercer Ranch like an army rising from the earth. Sheriff Wheeler rode at the front, his star glinting in the sunlight. He looked different than he had in the saloon. Taller somehow, stronger, like a man who had remembered who he was supposed to be. "Cyrus Blackwell," Wheeler called out, his voice ringing across the yard. "You're under arrest for the murder of James Mercer and for conspiracy to commit murder, assault, and intimidation against the citizens of this territory." Blackwell's men exchanged nervous glances. They were outnumbered now, 3-1 at least. The situation had changed, and they knew it. Professional killers were not fools. They fought when the odds were good. They ran when the odds were not. And right now, the odds were very bad indeed. "This is ridiculous," Blackwell sputtered. His composure was cracking, the smooth mask of civility falling away to reveal the fear beneath. "You have no proof. This is nothing but the word of a hysterical widow. Any court in the territory would throw out these charges. We have witnesses." Wheeler nodded at a young man who rode beside him. "Davy Carter, your former employee. He's agreed to testify about what really happened to James Mercer, about the orders you gave, about the money you paid to make it look like an accident." Davy Carter was young, barely 20, with the look of a man who had seen things that haunted him. He met Blackwell's eyes without flinching. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwell," he said. "I can't live with it anymore. I dream about it every night. The way his horse screamed when it went over, the way he looked at us, right at the end. He knew what was happening. He knew we'd killed him." "You're lying," Blackwell hissed. "You're a liar and a traitor, and I'll see you hang for this." "I don't think so." Wheeler's voice was calm, implacable. "Davy's not the only one who's willing to talk. There are others. Ranch hands who've seen too much. Townspeople who are tired of living in fear. The dam is breaking, Blackwell. Your secrets are coming out." Elijah watched Blackwell's face crumble. The rancher had built his empire on fear, on the certainty that no one would stand against him, that everyone was too weak or too scared to challenge his power. But fear, as it turned out, could work both ways. When people stopped being afraid, when they found the courage to stand together, even the mightiest empire could fall. "You think this changes anything?" Blackwell's voice was rising now, desperate and wild. "I'll be out of jail within a week. I have lawyers, connections, men in high places who owe me favors. You can't touch me. You can't stop me. I'll destroy every last one of you." "Maybe," Elijah said quietly. "But your men are watching, and so is everyone else. They're seeing what happens when someone finally stands up to you. They're seeing that you can bleed, just like the rest of us. They're seeing that you're not as powerful as you pretend to be." He took a step forward. "This is over, Blackwell. Your reign of terror is finished. Go quietly, or go in pieces. Your choice." For a long moment, no one moved. The tension hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Elijah's hand hovered over his gun, ready to draw. Around him, he could hear the click of hammers being pulled back, the creak of leather as men shifted in their saddles. Then Cutter made his move. Maybe he thought he could change the situation. Maybe he thought that killing Elijah would scatter the crowd, break their courage, send them running. Maybe he was just stupid and angry and unable to accept that he was on the losing side. Whatever the reason, he went for his gun. Elijah drew and fired in a single motion, faster than thought, faster than fear. 3 years of peace, 3 years of running, 3 years of trying to leave the killer behind, and his hands had not forgotten. The bullet took Cutter in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle like a rag doll. He hit the ground hard and lay there, groaning, his gun fallen from nerveless fingers. The other men froze. They had heard the stories about Deadeye Cole. Now they had seen the truth. 1 shot, 1 hit, faster than any of them could follow. "Anyone else?" Elijah asked quietly. No one moved. One by one, Blackwell's men raised their hands, let their guns drop from their holsters, surrendered to the overwhelming force arrayed against them. They were professionals, after all. They knew when to fight and when to fold. and this was clearly a time to fold. Sheriff Wheeler rode forward and took Blackwell's reins. The rancher looked old suddenly, shrunken, all the power drained out of him. He was just a man now, an old man who had gambled everything and lost. "Let's go," Wheeler said. "Nice and easy. We've got a long ride to the county seat, and I don't want any trouble." They led him away, surrounded by armed citizens who had finally found their courage. His men were disarmed and escorted behind him, a sorry procession of defeat winding across the winter landscape. Sarah came down from the porch, where she had been watching with the rifle in her hands. Emma and Thomas ran past her, straight to Elijah, throwing their arms around him. "You did it!" Thomas shouted. "You beat the bad men!" "We all did it," Elijah said, kneeling to embrace them both. "All of us together. That's the only way to beat the bad men." Emma looked up at him with those serious green eyes. "Are you hurt?" "No, sweetheart, I'm fine." "Good." She hugged him tighter. "Because you promised you'd stay, and you can't stay if you're dead." Elijah laughed, and it felt strange in his chest, unfamiliar, like a language he had forgotten how to speak. But good. It felt good. Sarah joined them, and they stood together in the yard, a family formed by chance and hardship, and something that might just be love. Around them, the neighbors milled about, talking and laughing, celebrating a victory that had seemed impossible just days before. The barwoman from the saloon approached, her usually stern face softened by something that might have been a smile. "I never thought I'd see the day," she said. "Cyrus Blackwell in handcuffs. It's like watching a miracle." "No miracle," Elijah said. "Just people deciding they'd had enough. That's all it takes sometimes. Just people deciding to stand up. Well, whatever it was, thank you. All of you." She looked at Sarah. "Your husband would be proud, Mrs. Mercer. Proud of what you did. Proud of how you fought for his dream." Sarah blinked back tears. "Thank you, Martha. That means more than you know." The days that followed were busy with the aftermath of victory. Blackwell was taken to the county seat, where he stood trial before a judge who was not in his pocket. The testimony was damning, not just from Davy Carter, but from a dozen others who came forward once they knew it was safe to speak. The verdict was guilty on all counts, and the sentence was 20 years in the territorial prison. His empire was broken up. The land he had stolen or forced people to sell was returned to its rightful owners where possible, sold at fair prices where it was not. The men who had worked for him were given the choice of leaving the territory or facing charges of their own. Most chose to leave. A few chose differently and found themselves sharing Blackwell's fate. Clearwater began to heal. New businesses opened, new families arrived, drawn by the promise of land and opportunity. The church steeple was repaired. The saloon got a proper name, painted in bright letters above the door, The Second Chance. And on the Mercer Ranch, life went on. The cattle grew fat on the winter hay Elijah had stored. The horses were healthy and strong. The fence stood solid and true, holding back the world. The house was warm, the fire always burning, and the smell of Sarah's cooking filled every room. But something had changed, something fundamental and irreversible. Elijah was no longer a stranger. He was family. Spring came early that year. The snow melted, the creek swelled with runoff, and the land burst into color like a canvas waiting for paint. Wildflowers carpeted the pastures in waves of blue and yellow and pink. Calves stumbled on wobbly legs, learning to walk, learning to run. The air was thick with the scent of new growth, new life, new beginnings. And on a warm April morning, on the porch of the Mercer homestead, Elijah Cole asked Sarah Mercer to marry him. He had thought about it for weeks, turning the words over in his mind, trying to find the right way to say them. In the end, he had decided that simple was best. He was not a man of fancy speeches or elaborate declarations. He was a man of actions. And this was the action that mattered most. "I know I'm not much," he said, holding her hands in his. "I've got no land, no money, no prospects beyond what we can build together. I've got scars on my body and worse ones in my soul. I've done things I'm not proud of, and I've lost things I can never get back. Elijah, let me finish, please." He took a breath. "But I love you, Sarah. I love your children. I love this land and this life and the future we can have together. And I swear to you, on everything I hold sacred, that I will spend the rest of my days trying to deserve you, if you'll have me." Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "You foolish man," she said. "I've been waiting for you to ask for weeks. I was starting to think I'd have to do it myself." He laughed and pulled her close. And she said yes against his lips, and the children came running from the house, having watched through the window, and suddenly he was being hugged from all sides, surrounded by the family he had never expected to find. The wedding was held 2 weeks later, on the porch where they had spent so many nights talking under the stars. The whole town came, bringing food and laughter and well wishes. Sheriff Wheeler presided over the ceremony, reading the vows from a worn Bible that had belonged to his grandmother. "Do you, Elijah Cole, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" "I do." "And do you, Sarah Mercer, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part?" "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." Wheeler smiled, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. "You may kiss the bride." He kissed her, and the crowd cheered, and the children threw wildflowers in the air, and somewhere a fiddle started playing, and people began to dance. And Elijah Cole, the man who had wandered for 3 years looking for redemption, found it at last in the arms of a widow and the laughter of her children. That night, after the guests had gone and the children were asleep in their beds, Elijah and Sarah stood together on the porch. The stars were out, thick as scattered diamonds against the black velvet sky, and the air was soft with the warmth of spring. "Are you happy?" Sarah asked, leaning against him. "More than I ever thought I could be. More than I have any right to be." "No regrets." He thought about the question. He thought about Margaret, the love of his youth, the woman who had taught him what it meant to care for another person. He thought about the farm they had built together, and the life they had shared, and the brutal way it had ended. He thought about the men he had killed in revenge, and the years he had spent wandering, and all the darkness that still lived inside him. "The past is the past," he said finally. "It made me who I am. The good parts and the bad, but it doesn't own me anymore." He pulled her closer, feeling the warmth of her against his chest. "You taught me that. You and Emma and Thomas. You showed me that it's possible to start again. To build something good from the ashes of something broken." Sarah tilted her head up to look at him. "We'll have more trouble, you know. This land, this life, it's never easy. There will be storms and droughts and hard times ahead." "I know, but we'll face them together. Whatever comes, whatever challenges the world throws at us, we'll face them as a family." "A family," she repeated, tasting the word. "I like the sound of that." "So do I, Mrs. Cole. So do I." They stood there for a long time, watching the stars wheel overhead, listening to the night sounds of the ranch they had fought so hard to save. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods, the creek murmured its endless song, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, wild and free, singing the ancient melody of the West. a melody of loss and redemption, of death and rebirth, of the endless human capacity to endure, to hope, to love. A song that would never end. Years passed. The ranch prospered. The herd grew. The children grew too. Emma into a young woman with her mother's strength and her own fierce determination. Thomas into a young man with his father's gentle heart and a gift for working with animals that surprised everyone. Elijah never touched his gun again. He hung it above the fireplace, a reminder of who he had been and who he had chosen to become. When trouble came, as it sometimes did, he dealt with it the way a rancher deals with trouble, with hard work, good sense, and the help of neighbors who had become friends. He became a pillar of the community, a man people turned to for advice, for help, for the wisdom that comes from having lived through the worst life can offer and survived. He served on the town council, helped build the new schoolhouse, gave testimony in trials, and mentored young men who reminded him of himself in darker days. And every night, no matter how tired he was, no matter what challenges the day had brought, he sat on the porch with Sarah and watched the stars come out. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they just sat in comfortable silence, holding hands, grateful for everything they had found in each other. One evening, when Emma was 17 and Thomas 15, when the ranch had grown to 500 acres and the original cabin had been expanded into a proper house, Elijah sat on the porch and thought about his life. He thought about the war. So distant now it seemed like something that had happened to someone else. He thought about Margaret, still loved, never forgotten, but no longer a wound that bled every time he touched it. He thought about the years of wandering, the darkness, the despair, and he thought about the day he had ridden into Clearwater, tired and broken and looking for a place to die. He had found something else instead. Something he had not dared to hope for. Something that had saved him, body and soul. Sarah came out and sat beside him, the way she had 1,000 times before. Her hair was grey now, streaked with silver, but her eyes were the same green they had always been, fierce and bright and full of love. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "Everything. Nothing. The way things turned out. Any regrets?" He smiled, the same answer to the same question she had asked on their wedding night. Not a one. Not any more. She took his hand, and they sat together as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. The children's laughter echoed from somewhere inside the house. The cattle lowed in the pasture, the creek sang its endless song, and Elijah Cole, once known as Deadeye, once a killer and a hunter and a man without hope, closed his eyes and felt peace settle over him like a blanket. He was home. The end. The first Sunday after their wedding, Sarah insisted they attend church. The building had been repaired over the winter, its steeple straightened, its windows cleaned, its pews polished to a warm shine. The whole town turned out, filling the small space to overflowing, and when the preacher called Elijah and Sarah forward to receive the congregation's blessing, the applause shook the rafters. "God works in mysterious ways," the preacher said, his voice trembling with emotion. "A year ago, this town lived in shadow. Fear ruled our hearts. Darkness filled our streets. But then a stranger came, a man seeking peace, and through him the Lord showed us that courage still lived in our hearts." He placed his hands on their heads and prayed, and Elijah felt something shift inside him. He was not a religious man, had not been since the war, but in that moment, surrounded by people who had chosen hope over despair, he understood something about faith that he never had before. It was not about certainty, it was about choice. The choice to believe that things could be better. The choice to act as if goodness mattered. The choice to love, even when love meant risking everything. After the service, people crowded around to shake their hands and offer congratulations. Children he did not recognize handed him wildflowers. Old women kissed his cheeks and called him a hero. Young men asked for his advice, his guidance, his wisdom. "You look overwhelmed," Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. "I am. I don't know what to do with all this." "You don't have to do anything, just accept it. You've earned it." But that night, sitting on the porch with the children asleep inside, Elijah found himself troubled. Sarah noticed immediately, as she always did. "What's wrong?" she asked. "They call me a hero, but I'm not. I'm just a man who did what had to be done." "That's exactly what a hero is." He shook his head. "Heroes are supposed to be good, righteous, pure. I'm none of those things, Sarah. I've killed more men than I can count. I've done things that would make those people in that church never look at me the same way again. And yet you did them. You fought in a war to free people from bondage. You hunted down the men who killed your wife. You stood up to a tyrant when everyone else was too afraid." She took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "The past doesn't define you, Elijah. Your choices define you, and you have chosen again and again to stand on the side of what's right." "Even when standing there meant killing?" "Sometimes, yes. The world isn't simple. It isn't clean. Sometimes the only way to stop evil is to destroy it." She kissed him gently. "What matters is what you do with the peace you've won. That's what defines you now." He thought about her words for days afterward, turning them over in his mind like stones smoothed by water. She was right, he realized. The past was the past. It could not be changed, only accepted. What mattered was the present. What mattered was today. So he threw himself into the work of building, not just the ranch, though that consumed much of his time and energy, but building the life he had always wanted, the life he had thought was lost forever when Margaret died. He taught Emma to ride, really ride, not just the gentle lessons he had given at first, but the hard skills of a true horsewoman. She took to it with fierce determination, and by summer's end, she could outride half the grown men in the territory. He taught Thomas to shoot, much against Sarah's initial protests. But he explained that knowing how to defend yourself was not the same as choosing violence, and she eventually agreed. The boy proved to have a natural eye, and Elijah felt a strange pride watching him hit targets at distances that would have challenged grown men. He helped his neighbors with their ranches, offering advice and labor in equal measure. He served on the town council, helped plan the new schoolhouse, contributed to the fund for widows and orphans. He became the man everyone turned to when they needed wisdom, guidance, or simply a strong back and willing hands. And at night, every night, he sat with his wife under the stars and counted his blessings one by one. The past still haunted him sometimes. There were nights when he woke sweating, reaching for a gun that was no longer at his side, hearing the sounds of battle that existed only in his memory. There were moments when a shadow fell a certain way, or a stranger walked into town, and the old instincts flared to life, the killer inside him stirring from sleep. But those moments came less often now. The dreams faded with time, the shadows became just shadows, and the killer, the man he had been, slept deeper and longer, until some days Elijah almost forgot he had ever existed. Almost. One autumn evening a year after the wedding, a stranger rode into Clearwater. He was young, perhaps 25, with the hard eyes and quick hands of a gunfighter. He wore his guns low on his hips, tied down, the way professionals did, and he asked questions about a man named Elijah Cole. Word reached the ranch before the stranger did. Elijah was working in the barn when Sheriff Wheeler rode up, his face grave with concern. "There's a man in town looking for you," Wheeler said. "Young fellow, looks dangerous. Says he's got business with Deadeye Cole." Elijah set down his pitchfork. "Did he say what kind of business?" "No, but I don't like the look of him. He's got trouble written all over him." For a long moment, Elijah said nothing. He stood in the barn door, looking out at the land he had come to love, the life he had built, the family that waited for him in the house. Sarah was in the kitchen, cooking dinner. Emma was doing her lessons. Thomas was playing with the dog they had gotten in the spring. Everything he had ever wanted was right here. Everything he had fought for, dreamed of, despaired of ever having. And now trouble had come looking for him. "Do you know who he is?" Wheeler asked. "No, but I can guess. During the war, during the years after, I made a lot of enemies. Some of them have long memories." "What are you going to do?" Elijah thought about the question. Once, not so long ago, the answer would have been simple. He would have strapped on his gun and gone to meet the trouble head-on, the way he always had. Violence was a language he spoke fluently, and he had never been afraid of the conversation. But that was the old Elijah, the killer, the wanderer, the man without a home. He was not that man anymore. "I'm going to talk to him," he said finally. "Find out what he wants. Maybe we can settle this without bloodshed." Wheeler looked skeptical. "And if we can't? Then I'll do what I have to do. But I'm not going to kill a man if I can avoid it. Not anymore." He went to the house first, to tell Sarah what was happening. She listened without interrupting, her face growing pale, her hands tightening on the edge of the table. "I'm coming with you," she said when he finished. "No. Stay here with the children. If something goes wrong—" "Nothing is going to go wrong." Her voice was fierce, determined. "Because I'm going to be right there beside you. We face this together, Elijah. That's what you said when we started this. That's what you promised me." He wanted to argue, but he saw the set of her jaw, the fire in her eyes. This was the woman who had faced down Blackwell with a rifle and a prayer. The woman who had refused to break, no matter how hard the world pushed. She would not be left behind. "All right," he said. "Together." They rode into town side by side, with Sheriff Wheeler flanking them. The streets were quiet, the way they always got when trouble was brewing. People watched from behind curtained windows, waiting to see what would happen. The stranger was waiting outside the saloon. Up close, he looked even younger than Elijah had expected. There was something familiar about his face, something that nagged at the edge of memory. "Elijah Cole?" the young man asked. "That's right. What do you want?" "My name is Benjamin Turner. You killed my father at Gettysburg, shot him through the heart from 500 yards while he was trying to help a wounded soldier." Elijah felt the ground shift beneath his feet. Of all the men he had killed, of all the faces that haunted his dreams, this was the one that haunted him most. A Confederate soldier, kneeling in the mud, trying to save a comrade's life. Elijah had put a bullet through his chest without a second thought. "I remember," he said quietly. "For 20 years, I've dreamed of this moment, dreamed of finding the man who killed my father, dreamed of making him pay." Benjamin's hand moved toward his gun. "I've practiced every day. I'm fast, Mr. Cole, faster than you ever were. This ends now." Elijah looked at the young man, at the hatred burning in his eyes, at the years of pain and anger that had brought him to this moment. He understood it all too well. He had walked that same road once, carried that same burden. "I won't fight you," he said. Benjamin blinked. "What?" "I killed your father." "That's true. It was war, and he was the enemy. But I killed him. If you need to kill me for that, then kill me. But I won't draw on you. I'm done fighting." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Sarah's hand found Elijah's, and he held on tight. "You're a coward," Benjamin spat. "A yellow-bellied coward who won't even face the man he wronged." "Maybe. Or maybe I've just learned that killing doesn't solve anything. It doesn't bring back the dead. It doesn't heal the wounds. All it does is create more pain, more grief, more hate." Elijah met the young man's eyes. I spent 3 years hunting the men who killed my wife. I found them all. I killed them all. And you know what it got me? Nothing. Nothing but more nightmares, more blood on my hands, more weight on a soul already crushed under the burden of everything I'd done. That's different. That was vengeance, justice. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly the same. A man with a gun, looking to kill another man because he thinks it will make the pain stop. Elijah took a step forward, and Benjamin's hand twitched toward his weapon, but did not draw. It won't stop, son. Not if you kill me. Not if you kill 100 men. The pain only stops when you choose to let it go. How? The word came out cracked, broken. How do I let it go? He was my father. I loved him. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for what the war took from you, from all of us. But the war is over. It's been over for more than 20 years. If you keep fighting it, if you keep carrying that hatred, it will destroy you, the same way it almost destroyed me. Benjamin's hand fell away from his gun. Tears were streaming down his face, and suddenly he looked very young, a boy who had lost his father and never learned how to grieve. "What do I do?" he whispered. "I've spent my whole life preparing for this moment. I don't know who I am without the hate." Elijah released Sarah's hand and crossed the space between them. Slowly, carefully, he placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. "You learn," he said gently. "You find something worth living for instead of something worth killing for. You build instead of destroy. You love instead of hate." He glanced back at Sarah, at the life they had created together. "It's not easy. It takes time. But it's possible. I'm living proof." Benjamin looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something. Whatever he found there made him take a shaky breath and nod. "I don't know if I can," he said. "I don't know if I'm strong enough." "You rode 1,000 miles looking for a fight. You had the courage to face a man they called Dead-Eye Cole. You're plenty strong enough." Elijah squeezed his shoulder. "Stay in Clearwater for a while. There's work to be done, and people who could use a young man with determination. Give yourself time to figure out who you want to be." It was not a perfect ending. There would be hard days ahead for Benjamin Turner, days when the old hatred flared up and the old wounds reopened. But he stayed. He worked on the Patterson Ranch, learned to raise cattle, made friends among the people of Clearwater. And slowly, year by year, the boy who had come looking for vengeance became a man who had found something better. That night, sitting on the porch with Sarah, Elijah finally understood what redemption really meant. It was not about erasing the past or escaping the consequences of what you had done. It was about choosing, every day, to be better than you were. It was about taking the pain and the guilt and the regret and transforming them into something that healed instead of harmed. He was not a perfect man. He never would be. But he was trying. And sometimes, that was enough. "You did a good thing today," Sarah said, leaning against him. "I did what I had to do." "No. You could have killed him. It would have been easy. Self-defense. No one would have blamed you." She lifted her head to look at him. "But you chose mercy instead. You gave that boy a chance at a life worth living." "I gave myself a chance," he said quietly. "Every person I spare, every fight I walk away from, is a step toward the man I want to be. And who is that?" He thought about the question, about all the versions of himself he had been. The soldier, the husband, the killer, the wanderer, the protector, the father. "Yours," he said simply, "and theirs, and maybe, someday, my own." She kissed him, and the stars wheeled overhead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled its ancient song. He was home.